Sometimes I get nostalgic about the times when we had next to no information about what Crowley looks like. And we went absolutely wild with our fan casts. And we talked about choices like John Cho and Idris Elba. And then I think about that little tap dance routine David Tennant gave us in episode 3, and I thought, well, maybe I'll get over the changes they made in the miniseries. But then I remember what they did with the dove and the duck, and I just feel like some issues needed to be addressed. So let's talk about Crowley. Alright, so before I begin, I should mention that this video will contain spoilers from both the TV series and the book. So if you, for some reasons, haven't seen the show or read the book and you care very much about spoilers, you should probably come back after you're all caught up. But if you have seen the show and read the book, or if you don't care that much about spoilers, then grab a seat and some snacks because we are going to be here for a while. So I first started reading Good Omens about 9 years ago, back when I was in middle school, and boy was teenage me enamored with Anthony J. Crowley. For me, I see this loser trying his absolute darnest to appear all effortlessly cool and laid back, when in reality he is always one phone call away from having a panic attack, which I find really relatable. As such, you can imagine how apprehensive I was about the casting of David Tennant, aka the 10th Doctor, aka Barty Crouch Jr., aka freaking Kilgrave. And then I watched the miniseries, and I actually really enjoy Tennant's Crowley. I love the way he delivers his lines. I appreciate how he compensates for the lack of eye contact with his entire body language. And I especially enjoy the moments where he goes full ham for his monologues, especially in episodes 1 and 4. That said, after watching the miniseries and going back to the novel, I don't quite feel that instant connection I felt with the Crowley in the novel. As much as I enjoy seeing a flesh and blood Crowley on screen, there are moments where I feel like the miniseries version of Crowley and the Crowley in the novel are two vastly different characters. Which is not to say that one is inferior to the other, it's just that these two give up so very different vibes that I wouldn't consider the miniseries version of Crowley to be a direct translation of the Crowley in the novel. So, what exactly happened in the process of adaptation that made these two versions of the same character feel so different? Well, after rereading the book and re-watching the show, I think I finally found the answer. It all boils down to one simple question that the devil himself liked to ask.
What is it you desire?
Yep, I believe the fundamental difference between the novel's version of Crowley and the miniseries version of Crowley is their respective motivations. They want very different things. And I'm about to break down how their respective motivations shape their character arcs. So, what does Crowley in the novel want? Well, we can start by looking at his material possessions, since they get quite some focus in the novel. If we pay attention to how the novel describes Crowley's belongings, we would notice that most of the time he owns something because he thinks it's something a cool person like him would have. I mean, he literally has an entire flat that he doesn't live in, filled with things he never uses, simply because they contribute to the hip and stylish persona he creates for himself. In the novel, when Hester and Liger goes to Crowley's flat to collect him, there is a long section that details what Crowley has in his flat, and it goes down like this. Crowley's London flat was the epitome of style. It was everything that a flat should be. Spacious, white, elegantly furnished, and with that designer unlived-in look that only comes from not being lived in. This is because Crowley did not live there. There was an unconnected fax machine with the intelligence of a computer and a computer with the intelligence of a retarded ant. Nevertheless, Crowley updated it every few months because a sleek computer was the sort of thing Crowley felt that the sort of human he tried to be would have. Here, we see that Crowley accumulates things he doesn't actually need simply because they contribute to his cool and fashionable persona. But just how effective is that persona? Well, not quite, actually. In fact, for all of his bravado, Crowley is constantly miserable and anxious due to hell's control over him. We learn from his interactions with Hastur and Ligur that most demons don't exactly care for his methods of dealing with humans, and whenever someone from hell phones him, they take pleasure in reminding him just how they can make his life really, really miserable. And here is the actual big bad in Crowley's character arc. It's not Satan, it's not the Armageddon. It's the fact that even after Crowley has fallen and become a demon, he still has his agency stripped from him. In the novel, after Crowley receives the Antichrist from Hastur and Ligur, he reflects on the situation and remarks that there is no getting out of this Armageddon business because he can't be a demon and still have free will. No matter how hard he tries to put up this laid-back, devil-may-care persona, he is still consistently aware of how much control hell has over him. And it is what drives his character arc to its climax. In the novel, after Crowley has figured out where the Antichrist is, he makes a list of the things he knows. First, Armageddon was underway. Second, there was nothing Crowley could do about this. Third, it was going to happen in Tadfield, or to begin there at any rate. After that, it was going to happen everywhere. Fourth, Crowley was in Hell's bad books. Fifth, Aziraphale was, as far as could be estimated, out of the equation. Sixth, all was black, gloomy, and awful. There was no light at the end of the tunnel, or if there was, it was an oncoming train. Seventh, he might just as well find a nice little restaurant and get completely and utterly pissed out of his mind while he waited for the world to end. Eighth, and yet... For me, here is the reason why Crowley in the novel is so appealing. A low-level demon like him has no say whatsoever in whether or not the world should end, but he still makes the decision to save the world anyway. Even when the odds are stacked against him, even when he is alone and terrified and powerless, he still chooses to turn his back on hell because he believes in his own judgment. The climax of Crowley's character arc is him finally getting the freedom to choose his own actions. When Satan is about to burst through the surface of the earth, Crowley realizes that there was nothing he could lose that he hadn't lost. They couldn't do anything worse to him than he had coming to him already. He felt free at last. When given the chance to choose for himself, Crowley decides on his own that he will stay and protect the humans with his best friend. By the end of the novel, Crowley is no longer acting according to a belief system imposed upon him by hell, but rather to his own judgment and desires. So, long story short, Crowley in the novel wants to do things not because hell says so, but because he can and wants to. His character arc revolves around him finally finding freedom and autonomy, even when the world is falling apart around him. So, now that we've established that Crowley in the novel is mainly motivated by his desire for freedom, what does Crowley in the miniseries want? Well, if the 30-minute long cold opening in episode 3 and all the scenes Neil Gaiman has added for Crowley and Aziraphale haven't clued you in, here's a little hint. Crowley wants to stay friends with Aziraphale. While the novel sort of implies some of the events in the two's shared history, the miniseries pretty much lays everything out for the audience. We learn how much these hereditary enemies care about each other, and we see the almost ridiculous lengths Crowley goes to preserve this friendship between them. For me, there are 4 scenes that really cements the fact that Aziraphale is Crowley's main motivation in the miniseries. The bandstand scene, the I'm going home angel scene, the bar scene, and the come up with something or I'll never talk to you again scene. In episode 3, when Crowley proposes to Aziraphale that they run away to somewhere in space, he makes it abundantly clear that he doesn't care too much about the Earth going kaboom as long as Aziraphale and him stay together. He counters Aziraphale's argument about heaven and hell by stating that
we're on our side.
And when Aziraphale tells Crowley that there is no our side and that their arrangement is over, Crowley is clearly hurt by the rejection. But that doesn't stop him from trying to persuade Aziraphale again in the scene outside the bookshop, this time even telling Aziraphale to get in the Bentley right then and there, as if he was going to drive them to Alpha Centauri, like in the end of Grease. At this point, I would like to mention that neither of these 2 scenes exist in the novel. In the novel, Crowley never brings up the possibility of leaving Earth, and he only goes to Aziraphale after he's killed Liger and trapped Castor in the answer machine. And if you think that these scenes are added specifically to emphasize Crowley's concern for Aziraphale, well, things only get more obvious when we get to the bar scene. Remember how in the novel, Crowley makes this list of his conclusions? Item number 7 is getting blind drunk and waiting for the world to end. In the novel, Crowley moves past item number 7 and decides to go to Tadfield on his own. However, in the miniseries, Crowley has decided to get absolutely wasted. And when Aziraphale asks Crowley why he hasn't gone to Alpha Centauri, Crowley answers,
I changed my mind. Stuff happened. I lost my best friend.
Here, it is made crystal clear that Crowley is beyond devastated that Aziraphale has apparently died, so much so that his grief has overridden his instinct to escape the apocalypse. Then, when Crowley realizes that Aziraphale is actually alive, he offers this line.
Look, wherever you are, I'll come to you. Where are you?
Once again, Crowley prioritizes Aziraphale over the Armageddon. It is only after Aziraphale tells Crowley to go to Tadfield that Crowley returns to the main narrative as an active participant in stopping the Armageddon. In the climax of episode 6, Crowley doesn't come to the same conclusion as his novel counterpart. Instead, the miniseries gives us this.
Come up with something, or I'll never talk to you again.
Throughout the miniseries, what motivates Crowley has always been Aziraphale's companionship. He is constantly trying to persuade Aziraphale that the 2 of them are not as diametrically opposed as their respective head offices would like them to think, and that their relationship is more than just an arrangement between 2 co-workers. After the 2 have successfully prevented the apocalypse, Crowley tells Aziraphale,
You don't have a side anymore. Neither of us do. We're on our own side.
This time, Aziraphale doesn't reject the notion. By the end of the last episode, we see our angel and demon tricking heaven and hell into leaving them alone, essentially turning their backs on their head offices and creating their own side. And the episode ends with the 2 of them toasting the world that they've helped save, while Tori Amos's A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square brings us to a soft and lovely conclusion to this partnership that spanned over 6,000 years. So the point I'm trying to make is that the Crowley in the novel and the Crowley in the miniseries have drastically different motivations. Crowley in the novel wants to do his own things and not have hell breathing down his neck and dictating his every move, while Crowley in the miniseries wants to stay with Aziraphale, who gets them into trouble but can also see Crowley for who he is rather than a representative of a side in a moral argument. And I think both versions of the character have compelling points. Crowley in the novel can be relatable due to his rejection of an arbitrary and oppressive belief system, while Crowley in the miniseries is probably more relatable to modern-day audience because they can relate to his desire to connect with and defend a loved one in an environment that is incredibly hostile to their relationship. I'm just a bit disappointed that even though the miniseries dedicated so much attention on Aziraphale and Crowley, some little moments of Crowley's character still got left out or changed, and that kind of took some of the impact out of Crowley's character. For example, I would like to mention two scenes in the novel that I think perfectly encapsulate the depth of Crowley's character. What two scenes, you might ask? Well, the duck scene and the dove scene. In the novel, Crowley basically sinks a duck because he is upset and distracted because of the whole Antichrist coming to Earth thing, and Aziraphale has to gently reprimand Crowley to get him to resurface the duck. Later, after Warlock's epic 11th birthday party, Aziraphale notices that the dove in his sleeve has died of suffocation. "It's late," said Aziraphale. "I can see that," said Crowley. "Comes up sticking it up your sleeve." He reached out and pulled the limp bird from Aziraphale's coat and breathed life back into it. These two scenes not only showcase Crowley's powers, but they let the readers know that despite being a demon, Crowley is capable of both malice and kindness, almost as if he has become more like a human. Also, in the novel, Crowley terrorizes his plants on a regular basis. He would water them, pick out the runt of the litter, and take it out of the flat for a few hours, and return with the empty pot that he would leave in the most obvious spot. This passage is delivered in a light-hearted and playful way, showing us that Crowley sometimes uses his demonic, scheming brains to do the most mundane tasks like gardening. However, in the miniseries, it is painfully clear that Crowley is scaring his plants because he knows he has screwed up the Antichrist switcheroo. He is essentially recreating his trauma of becoming a fallen angel by subjecting his plants to the same treatment that he's undergone. The scene is dramatic and darkly humorous, but it paints a very different picture of Crowley's psyche about being a fallen angel. In the novel, Crowley has pretty much made peace with the fact of him being fallen. There is a brief moment where he reflects that he hadn't meant to fall and that he just hung around the wrong crowd, but that is immediately followed by the mention that being a demon gives him the benefit of not having to buy petrol for his Bentley. Crowley in the novel doesn't exactly bemoan the fact that God cast him out. Rather, he kind of embraces the leeway that comes with being a demon. But in the miniseries, in both episode 2 and 5, we see Crowley protesting that he hadn't meant to fall. And in episode 5, he gives this really sympathetic recollection of how he fell, which is something that we never learned from the book. While this expansion of Crowley's backstory does give the audience more information on this character, it also further distances him from his novel counterpart. The novel gives us a trickster figure who delights in small-scale mayhem, but the miniseries gives us something more like a Byronic hero, whose fatal flaw has landed him in a dismal situation that he can only improve by spending time with Aziraphale. Which brings me back to the topic of motivation. We know that in the novel, Crowley performs both gestures of kindness and malice out of his own volition. However, in the miniseries, many of Crowley's gestures of kindness are either directed at or inspired by Aziraphale. If you pay attention to the times Aziraphale calls Crowley nice or kind, there are often situations where Crowley performs a miracle for Aziraphale's sake. Now, I think it's perfectly fine to have a character who is motivated to do good by their loved ones. But when that character's motivation focuses solely on one single character, you risk losing some of that character's depth and agency. I mean, I love novel Crowley because he is just about the most active character I have ever seen. Even when the plot should have rendered him powerless, he somehow pulls a stunt like driving the Bentley through the Thames to get to where the action is happening. But miniseries Crowley is ready to sit the Armageddon out because he thinks Aziraphale is dead. He becomes the most passive when his novel counterpart becomes the most active. And I am not saying that novel Crowley is superior because he is more active. I think that individually speaking, both versions of Crowley are active in their own ways. It's just that when I come into the miniseries with novel Crowley's actions in mind, I feel like the miniseries version of Crowley kind of pales in comparison a bit when it comes to the climactic moment. So, conclusions. I've talked about how the novel and the miniseries portray the character of Crowley, mainly in terms of how they present his motivations. I also talked about some of the changes that the miniseries made that I think sort of weakened Crowley's character. Mainly, that by changing some of his individual scenes, the miniseries sort of took away some of Crowley's initiative that is more present in the novel. All in all, even though I went a bit hard on the miniseries version of Crowley, I will say that most of my problems with him are limited to the script and the changes made during the adaptation. Purely in the context of the miniseries, I think that his character arc is both compelling and heartwarming, and he is definitely one of my favorite characters in TV history. Even though I personally still prefer the novel's version of Crowley, I can definitely see why fans of the miniseries adore this version of the character. He has its own tender, almost Shakespearean charm, and hey, he helped build the stars, which, in my opinion, is pretty fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video essay, so if you have stuck with me through all of that rambling, good for you. I might do more videos like this, so if you like this video, or if you think I've missed some points, or if you think that I'm just playing wrong with my interpretation, please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you prefer the novel's version of Crowley, or do you prefer the miniseries version of Crowley? Also, if you like this video, please like and share with your fellow Good Omens fans. I am Alina, and I hope you've had an ineffable time. Bye!